your travel time.
All right, you're up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The steering committee is called to order at 4 o'clock, December 17th, 2019. I'd like to go ahead and review the minutes of the previous meetings. Is there any omissions or anything to add to the minutes?
Make a motion, we accept the minutes as written.
Okay. First and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. 3, review draft of Kennebunkport Village Tomorrow Master Plan document. Bob, I guess you're up on that.
I guess I'm up. It's been a while since we've been here. You have the first draft of the report. There's a lot of information contained in here, and what we'd like to do is to go through some of these. First off, if you folks have written comments, that maybe at the end I can get those. Chris is going to try and get as many of the comments as possible, but if you have written comments on some of the sections, that would be helpful, whether you can get them to Werner, that can be scanned and sent to us. That would be very helpful, because we'll try and capture everything that comes out of these. So what we thought we'd do is go through the 5 of the 6 sections and see if there's any real highlight issues that you're concerned with. I know that Lori did provide me with some comments already, so we'd like to try and be as expeditious as we can, but getting as much of the input from you folks. There's still stuff that, as we've gone through all the meetings, we've gone through the minutes, we've gone through everybody's comments, and the last meeting going through some of those, there's still some fine tuning that needs to be done in terms of how you folks feel you want to proceed. You know, one of the key things, obviously, is in terms of the affordable aspect and just what we want to show for a plan itself as far as the graphic is concerned as part of the master plan. Those are a couple of critical things that we need to clarify. So the executive summary section was primarily to try and put a composite overview of every one of the sections and all the data that was collected to try and derive the focus of what the master plan actually is. And I know the other aspect is, you know, master plan or land use options. I know there was a lot of comments through this whole process that master plan may not have been the right name for this as well. So those are some of the things that we'd like to try and flesh out as well as we finalize the document. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. In terms of the steering committee, basically, you know, we executive summary introduced the property, the location, then we introduced the steering committee, the process how the Board of Selectmen selected you folks, and then went through the site analysis where our team evaluated what the conditions on the site were. So in terms of those 3, they're relatively straightforward, but if you have comments on those you want to discuss, or if they're just simple written things, as I said, we can get copies afterwards and focus on those, because I'd really like to get into the meat of the issues that you folks can put your input on. So, any comments on those first 3?
So, Bob, I think people have comments or what I've heard, but it may be more, general,
General, yeah.
and then more specific. So I don't know the best way for people to go about this.
Okay. Again, if they're written comments and they're simple, that's the best way. If there's
Well, I
if
think
there's
part of
substantive.
it is people want to discuss and kind of get some consensus.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss it before I wrote anything,
Okay.
so.
All right.
Well, you know, my whole point of view since day one has been that I want to make sure that we don't spend any more money,
Right.
Taxpayer money, that we stick to the 10 million or 14 million, however they want to look at it.
Right.
But that we don't spend any money. Having said that, we have to decide whether or not we want to take the middle of the road and we want to get some return on the money.
Right.
Whether we want to, it's going to be houses or what, but I have a lot of concern about reading some of the data that we got from the marketing study about the houses and the housing opportunities. And, you know, this says that there's 542, a market for 542 houses in the area over the next 5 years. And I'm saying, why? You know, why is there a market? what are we trying to do? Attract people from outside, or what are we trying? I thought the goal would be to try to get, to have housing where people who are working in Kennebunkport, living, or teaching in Kennebunkport could afford to live, et cetera, and not necessarily go out and try to attract people from, I don't know, Portland, Boston, wherever they are. But I looked at the 542 units, and then I looked at the other analysis where it says that a great percentage of our population is 65 and over, and I'm one of them. The actuarial table says that maybe we got 15 or 20 years, and if you do the math, it comes down to sometime between now and 20 years, there's going to be, one way or the other, there'll be 700 to 800 houses available on the market,
Yep.
or changing hands on the market,
Right.
whatever you say. So, you know, my question is then, what do we do with 540, I will probably never get there, but that's a lot of people. And so my whole thing is, we're gonna, I initially thought that, well, maybe what we would want to do is start and build, look at building, not building, but look at building some higher, if you look at the analysis, they need to be a little bit more expensive and affordable.
Right.
And I thought that, well, maybe we could look at that. And the reason I thought we could look at that was that the Heritage Trust now is going to build 6 houses, maybe 25 houses by 2025. I think that's the goal, but 6 we know of.
Right.
And those are what they're calling affordable housing for firemen, policemen, teachers, and so forth. And
Right.
yeah. So that would give us an opportunity to see how affordable housing in the town goes.
Right.
Okay, that would say, so instead of saying, okay, we're gonna march off and start building affordable houses and so forth, we would have an opportunity here to see how those 6 get built, or 25, whatever it turns out to be. The question, so we could see then what the covenants were, how they were gonna try to, you know, whether they're gonna be,
How to
put something
maintain.
on, maintain them
Yep.
and so forth, that kind of thing. And then we would have an idea of what affordable, and we would have an idea what the market might be. 6 is not a
Yeah.
big market, but
Right.
25 may be a good market. But then I started to think about where would those 25 houses go? And the other 19 go. And I don't know if the Heritage Trust was eyeing some of this property or not, I don't know. But somewhere else as well. But that would give us an opportunity. So the long and short of it is, I'm looking at the data, and I'm saying that, okay, if we did something on that end of North Street, we'd need to have some kind of a developer. We need somebody to cover the infrastructure costs, because I really don't want to see us increase the cost
Right.
of the taxpayers right now. So I think we've got enough. So those were my thoughts, and my thoughts were, initially were to, you know, maybe we should, you know, get a developer, take a look, et cetera, et cetera. But then I started to think about that part of it. I know I'm going on, but
That's
it's the
important.
way my mind works.
That's important. Appreciate getting all this.
As long as it works, Mike.
It's still working, still working. So then I started to, now I forgot what I was gonna say. So there you go.
We feel your pain.
So anyway,
In terms of what direction you thought,
what's that?
you were talking about whether or not to bring a developer as part
Yeah,
of it.
develop or not, and to see if that's the way we wanna do it, or, you know, do we need to rush off and do anything? Maybe what we wanna do is see other alternatives, and I've had this discussion with other people as well. So maybe what we wanna do is sit back and, for a bit, see how the affordable housing goes, see, that it won't hurt to talk to a developer, and then by talking to a developer concurrently, then we can start looking at something that says, if this is the way it's gonna be concurrently, then we can start looking as a group or another group or somebody, looking at what zoning changes we need.
Right.
Or may need, or would like, I don't know, whatever it's gonna be, we could go that route. So that would take time, that's a couple of years anyway, so maybe we don't do anything for a couple of years, and that's the way it goes, and we'd see. And in 2 years, affordable housing will be done, we'll have some indication of that, we'll see what
Right.
maybe the market is. Some of us will probably be turning our houses in, one way or the other. And we'll see what happens there. I mean, so the other thing that I thought was, then maybe what we could do if we just sort of sat back is, and took a look, is we could, there's been a lot of input on parks and trails and stuff like that. So maybe somebody would take a look at how we could put those in, looking at the lot definitions we already have on the
Right.
maps, and how could those go? And maybe that's something we want to do, plant trees, make walking paths or whatever,
Right.
but do that with grants. And there's a lot of grant money available and so forth, so it wouldn't cost taxpayers. Okay, I'll shut up now, but that's my
No,
thinking.
those are all critical, and, you know, I think in terms of the master plan from the get-go, I think everybody's thought that this plan was gonna be, you were gonna start next year,
Yeah.
as soon as this
No.
thing was done, so.
No, I think that the master plan, this is a misnomer, it's not really a master plan, it's what we've done.
Yeah.
And I think what we do now is we've had a lot of input from both sides. You know, we've had people say, sell it, we've had people do this, people do that, and they've all got their opinions, and I value their opinions. We just have to look to see what's best for us,
Right,
that's all. So,
okay.
that's me, that's it.
I think relatively soon we'll begin to get some feeling.
John, can we get your mic for you?
I think the Housing Heritage Trust is going to open its application process relatively soon. So we'll start to get some feeling for the demand.
Right.
I think that's upcoming, right?
When do you guys plan on building, starting to build, roughly?
He's not on the housing.
I'm not on it, I just,
Oh, I thought you said you were, I'm sorry.
no, I just sleep with one who is.
Keeps your wicked name.
Okay.
You all set?
No, I just think we'll start to have
Better.
Yeah, an idea of demand. Yeah.
Okay.
Picking up on what Mike was saying, I do think we need to talk to developers, and not just one.
Right.
I mean, and do this informally.
Yeah.
And it's in conjunction with conversations with a housing trust, just to see, does this make sense to the developers out there?
Right.
Who might be interested in doing work in Kennebunkport, and the Heritage Housing Trust. I mean, we've talked a lot about workforce housing and affordable housing, and there's a group in town that's going down that path already, so I think we do need to collaborate. As far as this being a master plan, I keep thinking of it as a roadmap and not a master plan, and I'm sure there are all sorts of
Terminology.
possibilities.
Yeah.
With respect to the report, just as a general comment, I had trouble with it.
Okay.
I had trouble with it. I found it to be, I think it had all the pieces, but I found it disjointed and repetitive.
Okay.
And I think it needs a serious edit.
Sure. Can do that.
But
This was just
then
your
I think
first- This was just your first one, and
Yeah.
you are gonna do another one.
Oh, yeah.
I understood.
Yeah, we want more feedback, you know, that's
Yeah.
part of it.
No, I mean, I recognize there's a sort of new discussion on zoning.
Yeah.
Which is important. And then there's the implementation strategies piece, which is currently empty. Obviously, you're looking to this discussion
Exactly.
to begin to flesh that
Yeah.
out.
And to Mike's point about the economics of it, you know, that study was done based on looking at what the land carrying capacity and what the area, and I think if we get into the land use section, that's one of our concerns of how to fine tune that in terms of what is a projection in terms of potential needs for the community. The marketing study was an overall broad assessment of the town and the region, and I think that's where that was coming from. And we can work with Tom on how to refine some of that to get your points pulled into that to make it a little bit clearer. And that's where we were a little on the fuzzy side in terms of exactly what we're looking at. Obviously, you and I had the conversation about having developers give some sort of input that helps kind of drive where you start looking at numbers. And again, you know, we know from the beginning of this was I think the RFP said a 50-year plan, you know, in terms of the broad look at it. And I think we've said from the beginning that this wasn't something that, you know, it's adopted as the next step, and you're gonna start putting a shovel in the ground next June. It was more or less to give kind of the roadmap to help the next step in the process, to say, this is what we've identified that we should do in terms of steps. And again, you know, the whole issue of dealing with the housing trust, waiting to see how that comes about. Mike's point about the using the open space, and I think I got that kind of consensus from everybody. There's an opportunity. I mean, right now, there are trails out there that, you know, can be taken advantage of. There were trails that were going to be part of the original subdivision, which are old tote roads and things that, you know, could be cleared, so not a lot of expense there. And then I think we talked about taking some of the cleared areas that may be part of the development that you may be able to improve for some short-term recreational type uses, that if it becomes a soccer field as an example, you know, that later on down the line, 10, 15, 20 years, you know, it's defined, you need it for X, Y, and Z that's come out of this plan or something future that can be done without not putting in a professional
It's
turf.
very hard to take parks away and convert them back into
That
some developed use.
I understand that. So, okay.
So I'm just going to share some of Russ's thoughts, just so you can have a flavor for them. One of the issues he had on page 7, which Mike talked about, was the total demand for new year-round housing in units. It says between 330 and 542 over the next 5 years. It says this is the total amount of new housing that could be supported in town, whether on the village parcel or elsewhere. So Russ's comment was, I still have a hard time comprehending this. The way I interpreted the explanation leaves me feeling this is more what the consultant believes the town could support and less what the market wants. He compares this to Biddeford. He says year-to-date in Biddeford, he pulled out some real estate numbers. Between 300,000 and 400,000, they've only sold 49 single-family units in the past year. And so he's saying Biddeford, which has a much bigger market and population growth, you know, how does that compare to what these numbers are saying? And I think that he's trying to connect this potential market demand to what Kennebunkport really wants. He talked to me about whether or not we really want to see the population grow, just because the market is there. What is our desire? If you look at our population over the past few decades, you know, we've been fairly stagnant. Of course, we are seeing the senior population continue to grow, and it's anticipated that will grow more. So it's more about what do we want the demographics to look like in the future, and how many new housing units do we want, or how much should the village parcel contribute to that and for whom? So if we are just trying to market for younger families or for in general, or if we are trying to market for people who work here, you know, and are connected, he feels more what he's heard from the public is there is a desire to connect those who work here in town to being able to live here in town. But he feels like that needs much further definition. He certainly would like to have, you know, fiscal impact, you know, balancing that in terms of any future. So making sure that it doesn't have a negative fiscal impact on town finances in the future. Trying to minimize that by having a partner with maybe a private-public partnership if we were to do housing, so that private partnership could pay for that infrastructure cost. He wondered whether or not we could do something in the first third of the property that would benefit a small population with a mix of market rate and affordable housing, as we've talked about. He goes back to, again, this concern about where is our population growing and how are we going to contribute to that. You know, he's thinking we don't want to just become another Falmouth or Cape Elizabeth or Yarmouth, that our population starts to exceed what we think we can support, and it changes the flavor of the community. He talks about preserving open space on the parcel He's had, a number of people talk to him about, maybe we should just conserve it. He said, we have a conservation trust in town that has done a good job and is continuing to conserve land, and that's not being done at the expense of the taxpayers. So perhaps we could continue to support their efforts, but really look at this parcel in a different way than just conserving it. He wants to see a healthy balance between development and preservation. And certainly, with that neighborhood and that residential area being a nice mix for that area. Lastly, he talks about the future opportunities. So we talk about what future needs might be, and he calls them pulse checks. But he'd like to see in the plan that it says how often we might do a pulse check on what the community needs, how many years that might be between pulse checks, who would do it, what questions should be asked, and who would be responsible for that.
Didn't he also say somewhere in there that he would like to see some return on investment somewhere along the line?
Right, and one of the things that he and I talked about yesterday was, you can look at return on investment both from a cash, but also from what does it add to the community. And so, balancing that and making sure there is some sort of return that the community values.
Werner, can I ask you a question? The building cap, is that still 40 building permits? So in terms of on an annual basis, how many of those are actually implemented in a year's time?
I would say, so have we hit the cap as of late? No. And where we,
Not in the growth.
correct, and where we haven't seen.
You're not being heard by
No.
people.
Yeah, so the question was regarding the growth cap. And so we have a set number of 40 on an annual basis, but it's divided up amongst 3 areas. We have a growth zone, a transitional zone, and a rural zone. And what we've been seeing is that over the past couple of years, is that we haven't hit the cap numbers in the growth and the transitional zones, but we've always hit the cap in the rural zone. I think at this point right now we have a waiting list for the rural zone for next year. So that I think that speaks to some degree about the affordability component in terms of land. That's where we're seeing the demand, and that's where folks are looking to build. But that's where we've held the line in terms of the number of permits issued.
Thanks. That kind of helps me looking at this. Yeah.
Bob, I'll let my 2 cents in on this. Putting a lot of equity into the comprehensive plan, and the Growth Planning Committee is now reviewing that. I believe it is a perfect opportunity for the new comprehensive plan to encompass every little detail that's in this. And am I going to give them more work to do? Maybe. But I believe that we're ignoring, to some degree, the character of the town that we've created that's very well described in that document by looking away from it as what the town should be following. That's a perfect timing right now to say that we can use their revising of it to talk to all the things in here that are encompassed in this plan, without creating anything new, other than maybe they might need a few new members. Out there for anybody who would like to volunteer. But I also think that, that we have an investment that we need to protect. And it doesn't mean that we need to afford it. We've already spent the money. And we wouldn't have gone that far if somebody didn't feel that we had the ability to do that in the first place, i.e. spend the money. And whether the paybacks, and I agree, the paybacks don't have to mean dollars back into the black. It means definitely be attentive to what creates the red side. But the town, when people drive through town, and this is something I found out years ago, myself included, when people drive through town, what they see out their car window It's this incredible open community that has beautiful sights from your car that are what they believe is the community. Maybe they think it's open space, maybe they think it's parks or just the beauty of town, but most of those vistas come at a price. Whether it's somebody else has decided not to develop their grandfather's property, or somebody has gone out of the way years in front of us, and the trust, for instance, preserving those scenes, so, all that above. I think that we've got, I think we have a gem in the rough, and that only in the years to come, way long after we're here and gone, will the true value of that look to, show up.
Right.
Will it come to be, to something other than what we see it as? I mean, I see it now as just a piece of property that a bulldozer had a good time on, or an excavator. But there are plenty of people in town that already hike it, and walk it, and ski it, and hunt it, and snowmobile it, or all those things. And I think if you opened up to a different conversation and asked some people, more about how to, the first thing to do would be to maybe organize how you'd like people to walk, ski, ride a bike, all those things that are really hard for a community to get. Communities don't get that. I mean, maybe in the state of California because they started that way, but, we use the term, in this meetings, we use the term open space. Well, open space in the town of Kennebunkport is not very pretty. It's like 200 square feet over here and a half an acre over there, and that's not connected. There's no way that I'm gonna go over to Alan's house and set up a picnic on his 0.10% open space that's his property.
You're more than welcome.
Understood. Well, but we just, it's
Right.
very convoluted.
Yeah.
It's a huge patchwork that there's no connectivity to it whatsoever. This is entirely connected.
Yeah, you've got the potential, just by the fact
I
you have
think
a
that-
mile between North and School, what you can integrate on that site is
Exactly.
extensive.
And if the town needs a center, i.e. a municipal center, which I think that the heart of a community is around, along with the school and a few other things, then that's a perfectly good site for it. But that doesn't mean that you build it before you need it. You build it when and if you need it. And now we've definitely put that property in the bank, and that's a huge asset also. So I think the easiest thing for people, modern man, to do is to do something. And the most difficult thing for modern man to do is to do nothing. And so I'm all for let's do less and let somebody in the future figure that one out.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here, and it's been so helpful to hear, what everyone's been saying, because I think, again, in reading through this, and as we've all been saying all along, all of this is so essential, and each piece of this puzzle, everything that comes later has to come from the pieces that we're laying now, and so this report was absolutely critical, and all the information we've gathered is important, but I'm hearing, and I know I'm feeling more the sense of, let's not feel that we need to now show folks that we're going to do something, and it's going to happen in 2021, and it's going to look like this. Because I'm not sure we're there yet, and the biggest risk we would have would be moving forward to something that wasn't right for the community, wasn't affordable, would cause more problems. And, on the housing thing too, I had a lot of the same questions of kind of like, whoa, we have, is there a demand for 500? Do we want 500 more? And is this new housing, or is it turnover that there's always going to be? Which also reminds me, I really would urge us, however we would do it, either as another stakeholder group, but I didn't hear a lot of input from the Realtor community, and I don't know how much they keep this data or how much would be anecdotal, but either way, what happens now when a young family comes to town and they say, we want to live here, but gosh, it isn't affordable? Where do they go? What happens to them? How often does that happen? How often are they selling homes to young families that have children that go to Consolidated that maybe are in the 500 to 700 range? Are there, you know, and are there many more of those coming now than there are looking that can't afford to live here? You know, all those things weren't in this market study because the market study had to be more sort of regional, but I don't feel like it came from talking to people that are actually buying and selling homes in Kennebunkport.
I'll
you
check
know.
with Tom, because I know he was reaching out to local
Okay.
realtors to get some feedback, but I
Right.
can confirm that.
Right, I think that'd be really helpful to hear,
Yeah.
you know, kind of, and I know young families are moving in, and so what is their price point, or were they having to stretch to get here, but they still did?
Right.
Any of that data would help inform kind of the need to address the
Sure.
young families and the demographics. So some of these numbers just look scary, and we certainly wouldn't want to go based on those to start making plans about what we were gonna do and what we
Sure.
need to build, and we need how many units, that kind of thing. So, so much good information, but again, instead of a master plan, it's that sense of this has been an amazing discovery process, options, whatever we wanna call it, but there's unfortunately still a lot of work to be done, which is sort of good and bad, because it's like, I don't know, you know, but maybe
Sure.
the idea even is to just go slower for a while. I really like the thought that Mike had too of, and others have expressed, that with the Heritage Housing Group, which has really got a lot of work underway and already, we're gonna have in a few years some really important data from them about how that's going and what needs had to happen in the town to make that possible. And I think that'll inform this process more, so we can kind of hopefully wait to see how some of that pans out.
Sure. Okay. Rebecca?
He's over here. Is that good? So I just wanted to agree with what everybody else has said so far. All of that feedback, I think, is really important for moving forward in the next draft. I'd also like to start with a cheesy confession that Kennebunkport is my favorite place on the planet. As a younger person who recently came into the area, I'm a traveler at heart, and this is the first place I've ever wanted to truly be rooted to, which makes, I think, our charge as a committee that much more of a challenge. This is a really special place for every age group, I think. And what we decide or put forward for the community to decide really is shaping the future of this town, whether we act or not, in a variety of ways. And that's a really important charge, I feel like. And we have, I think, as individuals, evolved from our personal preferences for the property. I love the idea of a park, bringing everybody together, to really appreciating what the public has given us as feedback and sort of, you know, evolving our recommendations and requests for information to honor what the community has reported to us that they want. And this report feels really comprehensive to me. I appreciate all of the data that has been provided. Unfortunately, I still feel like I'm in a place of Switzerland where I can make the argument either way. And I don't know that we are the ones that should be making that decision at this point. I think we gathered a lot of feedback early on, and we may be at the time where, again, we go back to the community and provide maybe a concise version of what we've put together to get that feedback again with some concrete options.
Sure.
So that we can truly get a feel for what the community wants the future to be shaped as. I think a gentleman at the last meeting pointed out that not every demographic has necessarily been represented. They've had an opportunity, but our meetings are not necessarily the most convenient for everybody to take part. And so I think at this point, it would be valuable to do a more active community feedback search before we finalize anything in whatever we're calling this master plan. Does that make sense?
It does, but let me ask this question, only because try to get to that point. I'll use a bad analogy, a Chinese menu is to develop based on all the input from the directions from we need affordable housing to making it all open space. Looking at various scenarios of how things could happen on the property. I know we did that visioning session and, you know, with Russ from Principal in terms of showing how you could max the site out in development, which I know scared everybody, but that's to get you to a point to understand what the land carrying capacity is to work your way down as to whether or not we look at trying to, based on the input, just put some concept scenarios together. It's gonna be more verbal than anything else without actually defining and developing a site plan as to how some areas of the site could be developed, what the opportunities are. If you did all open space,
Right.
you know, this is what you may be able to do in certain areas. I mean, where you've got the clearing, you know, obviously it makes opportunities, you know, the soccer field option, you know, something like that. But there are, as I said, a network of trails that, you know, were preserved in there that while, yes, it looks clear because the development was going in there, and it would not look like that if the development happened, the same way you go in and do something with this property, it's gonna have the character that you want it to have. So it's just a, you know, when you say it's a gem, it is a gem, but it just hasn't been chiseled yet into the shape that you want it to look like, so. But I mean, if we were to develop that type of thing in terms of a chronology of potential options, because you do have a disparity in terms of how the community has seen it as far as development. And again, it's not something, and I mean, I took this from the beginning, that this was a plan to give guidance, but it wasn't something the town was gonna implement immediately. You know, it's just identify opportunities, what the constraints were, what some of the steps would need to be taken in order to start to achieve the vision.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, with the amount of acreage out there, you know, you don't know what's gonna happen in 10, 15, 20 years
It's not
that you
going
may need,
anywhere, is it?
you need the land for. You know, and to Mike's point, it's costly to develop that piece of property. And it needs to have some sort of mechanism how that happens. You know, the last time we talked about the phasing option of doing something, you know, from North Street up to the CMP or just a little bit past CMP to go with more higher market rates similar to Wallace Woods to get some sort of return. And then, you know, the potential for the town hall site where you have your infrastructure at that location. Starting with something like that to get some return, then start looking at developing the trails. You know, as far as some of the disturbed area, there's, you know, all the loam that was stripped from that site, you know, was all stockpiled to be reused on the site. So there's an opportunity of materials that are already there to help do some mitigation areas that are identified for potential open space uses. So it's, there are a lot of things in there that if we try and break that down a little bit more based on what we're hearing now, you know, that we can come back with. And I think what we probably want to do in order to get to the finish line is to break some of those scenarios down and send them out to everybody and just have feedback from that, not necessarily meeting it, you know, because more meetings, and I know what you're probably going through the comp plan that I'm going through with mine, it's difficult to get everybody to want to keep coming out to meetings. So if we send stuff out and, you know, Werner and Lori can look at it, then we can get it out to you folks so that we can get some, yeah, I think this is the direction, something you can handwrite, send back comments so we can try and get everything to a point to come back with the entire committee and the public to see before we actually finalize the draft version of this. You know, this does need editing, there's no question about it. There's a lot of information we got to try and put through into this thing, so. And there's still more.
Yeah.
You know.
Could I
Sure.
just jump on that? I would like to advocate, I guess, for some action to be taken in terms of beautifying the place. I've been here 3 years, I think, and it's looked the same. And it instead of a natural space, which it is, it looks like a space waiting to be developed, and that's been for 3 years.
Right.
And it's a bit of an eyesore, to be perfectly honest, where it looks like a road that somebody started and then just dropped. And when it could be developed, you know, early on with just some natural trails, maybe some signage that actually is inviting the community in. Instead, we have sort of the blocked road and, you know, the cones. And it's just an eyesore where it could be sort of a place to test, you know, will people use this as a community gathering for biking and hiking and all of that?
You can do a combination of the trails and some of the exposed area because, you know, you're looking at expense. And while there are grants out there, when you get the volume, the dollar amount you need to make something happen, the loam that's on site that can be processed and just stabilize those areas and put them into a meadow. You know, so at least it's a green space,
Yes.
you know, and then develop some of the trail network that's already there and then reinforce some of that, so. As I know, we can take the plan that was done originally for the subdivision, and then from that visioning session, there were a lot of plans that we wound up doing a composite of where trails and things might go.
Yeah.
So you can refine that a little bit to add that in part of one of the scenarios, so.
Yes.
So I'm gonna ask Werner to come up here for a minute. With his microphone. Sit at the table, Werner, so we can see you. I mean, I don't have a vote on the committee, but I would say, you know, this process did not go the way I imagined it would. And I have, you know, mixed feelings about this process. And so why did we begin the process? And we began the process because when the town, before the town purchased it and after the town purchased it, there were a lot of people coming forward saying, you know what we should do? We should do X, and we should do Y, and we should do Z. And people had a lot of ideas. And in a master plan process, I thought would be a process for the public to have input and to develop a plan. And what it felt like through the process was more like a comprehensive planning process, where people weren't necessarily talking about this piece of land, but about the culture and community of Kennebunkport, or what they felt was lacking. So when people talk about, you know, preserving some of the land, I mean, they're talking about wanting to preserve some of Kennebunkport, and they see more development happen, and that's concerning to them. You know, when people talked about the community gardens, you know, or, you know, people put stickers on people laying on the lawn and watching a movie. What I heard a lot, and Werner and I have talked about this, is that people want a place where they can connect to neighbors and feel a part of a community. And I think that people are feeling that's lacking a little bit, or that, you know, the summer or seasonal population, the tourism piece of it, you know, makes them feel like, where's there a space for me in this community? And could this piece of land represent that space for me? We heard that in people's comments, you know, when they reacted to commercial activity. You know, if it was a little coffee shop, maybe they said, but, you know, no t-shirt shops, you know, none of that. We heard people talk about speeding on an imaginary road where nobody lives. And so what that says to me is those are concerns people have. They want a safe place where they live now and in the future, and that's what they want Kennebunkport to be. And when they talk about community, you know, that doesn't just happen on a vacant piece of land. That takes programming, you know, and it takes somebody to connect people and help them. So that's when it felt more like a comprehensive planning process to me about what are people saying about the community in general. And I agree with Jamie that maybe this does connect as the comp plan process is going forward, because the year-round community piece, you know, the year-round housing, the affordable housing, is really about trying to maintain a sense of a year-round community and making sure that we have a mix of demographics. Those are big community goals. And maybe this piece of land takes a part in that process. But I would tell you, having gone through a variety of master planning processes in my life, usually there comes a point where people become very passionate and they all pull around certain goals, and it becomes clear that this is the purpose for the land. And I never felt that in this process. I never felt that, people like the sense of community and the year-round population. And, you know, one of the questions I've had is, well, maybe there's just not enough impetus right now. People have these general concepts, they're talking about the future of Kennebunkport, but there's just not a need for the land to do something at this moment in time. I think the mapping process we did was beneficial, because if we do something in the future, it's good to know where we should be doing it and where it wouldn't be good to do it. And I think understanding better with developers, because that's an idea floating out there, in terms of what their needs are and what's reasonable for us to expect from a private-public partnership. And I think the land will continue to value itself over time. I think the other thing we heard is that people are very concerned about spending any more money, you know, and that they want to make sure that cost doesn't continue to grow. But I'm just left wondering, is there an impetus to do something right now, or not? And Werner, I don't know if you have anything to add to all that I just said.
Yeah. I mean, Laura said most of our conversation. But, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think a lot of what I've been looking at is trying to understand the theme of what people have been saying. Because we're hearing a lot of different things, separate things, and what, if I consolidate what I've heard people say, and I would say some consistent commentary that, that we hear. Now, whether it's real or perceived, is that the town spends a lot of time and focus on those other elements, whether it be, the perception that a lot of our time and resource goes towards the tourist industry, or whether it goes to commercial activity, or whether it goes to, the summer residents, or or the beach, or all those different types of things. We hear that the town spends an awful lot of effort in those areas, which is true. I mean, we do. That's. I mean, this is our focus. Whenever folks are here. But what I think I did consistently hear from folks who participated in this process was, what's going to be done here for the residents? So this is a piece of property where there's opportunity to do that. And there certainly is not consensus about what exactly that is, but there does seem to be consensus that residents are, feeling the need to have something that's there specifically for them. And I don't know exactly what that is, but because I think people are coming out and saying, well, maybe it's that gathering space. But if it's a gathering space, it isn't just an open field. It is some place that's developed, that's managed, that, as Lori stated, would have programming that somebody has to facilitate and manage and schedule and all those types of things. So, and so those are fine things to think about, but, I think we have to recognize that if we go down that road, there's mechanics to figuring out how we actually do that. It won't just magically happen. But that's what I've heard as a consistent theme, for folks that may be making sure that we have a place for the future population. I've often told folks that, the housing question for Kennebunkport is, yes, it's a question of development, but it's really more a question of what do you want the future population to be. The housing is just the mechanics of where you got to put them. What do you want the future population to be, and what do you want that to look like?
So how do you think this connects to a comp plan, if at all?
Well, I think we'll see. I would expect to see in the comprehensive plan that folks will participate in helping flesh out some of those needs. Now, keeping in mind that the comp plan, really is a 10-year plan. It's there'll be items in there that talk about what we do beyond that, but it's really a 10-year. It's really a 10-year plan, and so what I hope is that we'll have folks participate with us in the comp plan process and help, flesh out some of these needs, some of these specific needs that we can identify in a comp plan that helps us figure in a strategy plan of hey, here's what we want to see developed, and we want to see that developed in the next X number of years. And the charge to that goes to this particular group. And my hope is that, as we flesh those things out in a comp plan, then there's consensus when it comes time to figuring out the mechanics of it, which in most cases is going to be a budget, ultimately, that there will be support for that because it's in the comp plan. If we spell out that the community wants a public space to gather, to have activities, to plan things like that, and that is a strategy that, say, gets assigned to, a combination of Public Works and the Recreation Department, then understand that, all right, if we give that to a department, then they're going to need to come forward with, here's how we're going to make that happen. And I'll just pick that as one example, but that's what I hope that we'll hear further from folks as we work in a comp plan. And this property is part of that. And, you know, and I think growth planning, myself, we want to hear people say, hey, this is a need and it could go here. And what's important with getting that into comp plan is that's going to be that document that people get to vote on. You know, I've had folks ask, well, when do we get to vote on this report? Yeah, that's not really what this, what this is. This isn't this is an information gathering document. It's going to have recommendations. It's not a document that folks vote on per se. But what folks do vote on are going to be the action items that will hopefully be tied into a comp plan that then translate into an actual action plan.
Quick question, can you remind us, or at least for me, the timing of the comp plan? I don't know where we are in that or what the
Sure.
schedule is for it.
Just begun it, haven't you?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we've just begun the process of doing. We've done a number of public outreach sessions. I would say
Could you remind people of the website for the comp plan?
you would ask me that.
Paul, what's that?
I'll
Isn't
say
it like
there's a link on the.
Comp 2020 or
That's
something?
correct. There's a tab on the, if you go to the town's website, so kennebunkportme.gov, there's a tab right dead smack in the middle. It'll take you to that page. It links you to a separate website. But I'll say that,
It's called 2030 Comp Plan on the town website. There's a link right there, 2030 Comp Plan.
one of the themes that you're going to see throughout the comprehensive plan is resilience. Growth Planning Committee, as we developed the RFP and as we selected the team that's helping us out with that, wanted to, we wanted to take the approach that we tie resilience into every chapter of the comprehensive plan. And so, that's a buzzword that a lot of folks use for environmental concerns, and that's certainly a big part of it. But it's also, a tie into your population. It's a tie into your school system. It's a tie into all of those things of how do we help develop those key pieces of your community that need to be more resilient because they're faltering. They have challenges, and how do we beef them up? How do we make them stronger? So that's the theme that we hope to see that's going to present itself throughout the comp plan.
So Connie's question though was, where are we?
Where are we at? So timing-wise, we've just started this
to go to the
process.
website.
Yeah, so this is over the course of the next year. You won't necessarily, you're not going to see a document here in June of 2020. So this would be, the goal would be that we have something for folks to vote on in 21. And, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for folks. We want folks to participate, in this, in this process, to come to those meetings, to provide for feedback. It's a good website that's there, has a lot of good information, so.
So the question is, how do we get from where everybody is in terms of thinking to developing some finality to this, or next steps? And so it's been a lot of information gathering, but we can't just be in data gathering mode forever. We need to bring some closure to this. And so I think it could start for Bob, and Bob has laid out a master plan outline that we emailed out, that we've looked at in past meetings. This is a normal plan where you'd have an executive summary, an introduction, you talk about the public process, you do your assessment, and you make your recommendations and implementation strategies. That's Planning 101. So the question is whether that outline makes sense to you guys, and if it doesn't, what would you like to see change? Maybe that's a starting point, as well as what pieces go in there. And then where are those pieces you guys can agree on? We've talked about money, how we fund things in the future, whether we're ready to make a decision on moving forward in one direction or another, or whether it's more about maintaining the land available for development for the future. So being conscious about where conservation and trails and beautification, I've heard that from someone else besides Rebecca, about could we do some simple things so that it is a more attractive piece of property while we're in the waiting mode? And could we get some grants to do some natural connections, I'll call them, in education while we're in waiting mode, if that's what we're in? Or do people feel like I'm wrong and there is impetus now to do something? I mean, there are some forks, I think, that lead you in one direction or another.
Well, it seemed to me that there were a couple of items that, for which there seemed to be some impetus. One might be a new town hall, new location, and a location for town hall. That's real. And at some point, that's gonna, either you gotta conclude you don't need a new town hall, or you wanna put it somewhere else, but that's one thing that was driving us. And then, the other thing that seemed to be an impetus was there is a need for workforce housing in town. We've had a good discussion about that. And we could certainly wait and see how the Heritage Housing Trust tackles that and what its experience is before we decide that that is definitely something you want to see on the village parcel site. Those are the two things that I thought I see as specific things that had sort of timelines associated with them. I think from a sort of aspirational point of view about making this a place for residents of the town, definitely trails, some open space destination perhaps seem to be of interest. And I've said before, I think putting a couple of trails in there that everyone could use as soon as possible would give the town some sense of ownership, town residents some sense of ownership. And that could be done respecting any other areas where we think development could go forward in the future. And that's development that is housing, and it's housing it's workforce housing, or it's housing, sort of fully market rate housing that could cross-subsidize the workforce housing. I think that's something we'd have to get into at some point. Or it's areas that we want to preserve for future town use. Right now, we don't know what they are.
Agreed. And I go along with what Mike said, and that is, this was a chunk of change. And for us to want to rush into anything at this point is, number one, more of an expense, which I don't want to have happen. But also, my whole idea for purchasing this piece of property was for posterity. I mean, in 100 years, we don't know what's going to be going on. I mean, we won't have cars, we may be flying around, but, I know, not me. I can't even drive in the snow. But I don't want to see it develop to the point where we wind up as a town not having any land again. This to me was almost a gift to the town, that, in 10 years, we might need a little walk-in clinic, and we don't have to worry about where we're going to put it. That's how I see this, and not to be creating things just because we purchased the land. That's what I'm going to say.
I think one of the things that, that we've focused on a lot is what are the various elements that came out of our visioning? And it's a list of things. Werner just said something about the overall feeling of this is, what is this going to do for the people who live here? And, do the people who live here need 540 new high-end homes? What is it, if this is going to be a master plan for the people who live here and are going to live here, maybe we need to back off some of those specifics of what is it, which one of these 14 different things did we find from our visioning session, and say, what is it that we're doing for our existing and developing population? Not how are we going to bring in 540 new $500,000 homes.
I don't think any of us want that.
No, just to be to be clear, so when I read that section about, the 542 houses, I think I had probably the same reaction that everybody else did, and that was that, And so, as far as, feedback for Bob, that section, I think that needs to be reworded, because if everybody gets the initial impression when you first read that, then there's a problem, with that piece there. I think, after you read it a couple of times, you get the sense that, okay, what this is saying is that, out of the demand for housing within our region, our housing market, Kennebunkport's share could be X. If you do, that's really what that's saying. But that's not the first impression that you get. Especially in the context of this, you read it and go, 542, what the heck is that? I mean, so.
You wanna go with 20-story building.
Right. I mean, that was, that was my first impression. And I think for Bob and his team, that's the kind of feedback that they're gonna be looking for from this document. I know I've been going through and have been making notes saying, you know what, this is redundant, or this is not clear, or, some different organization for this piece. So those types of specifics, I know for me would be helpful, for this document. Not to say what you're looking for, Bob, but,
That's what I'm looking for.
okay.
That's what he's looking
Yep.
for.
Bob, do you know, is there a?
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's gonna be a public comment in just a few minutes. But
Thanks. Can't see back there. Thanks. Was there ever a, I want to say water source map of which directions the streams go and where that water comes from? Which direction does it end when it leaves? Is it Alan's property feeding the water? Are we feeding it,
The water, the stormwater, it's not up. Basically, the northwesterly corner of the site is one of the larger wetland areas.
Yeah?
That's.
And that's the
stream
high-
Right.
that's
And the significant vernal pool is, going up into the site, it's immediately to the left of that. That's the emanation of one of the stream segments that comes down. The other one comes in off of the McCabe property down closer to. the
Okay, so
CMP.
that's feeding across that.
Correct, and then they converge roughly within the CMP easement, and then runs down if you're coming in on the access way. Basically, this is the larger one I was talking about.
Right.
Oh, yeah, Mike.
Who's got-
Oh, I've got it. I got another one right here.
Is this one?
It turned on though.
This is on. Okay, so again, this is the larger of the wetland complexes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the vernal pool we're talking about. The stream, and I'm having difficulty following it, but it pretty much falls down along here.
Yeah.
And then the second stream segment starts in this area in here, and they pretty much converge down in here, and then follow along this outer edge down through here, and then cuts back through here and goes under
It
North.
goes under the culvert to the river.
Correct, it goes to North Street, and then what on the USG map, USGS map calls Bass Cove, and then enters into the Kennebunk River. There are a couple other small seasonal tributaries that go into this, but
we
those
don't-
are the only
we
two
don't have
major
a
streams.
specific map just for of that.
I can create one. I have the data. It's just that that's not an issue. Because the existing conditions plan, which basically is the survey plan that we can just take off.
Right.
All the other sundry information that provides that. Because actually, we have one aerial photograph that's part of the presentations we've done that shows what the existing conditions are, and then we've dropped on that where the stream corridor falls, what the shoreline setbacks are, and so that information is there.
Okay.
And then all the wetland pockets that are on there are shown. So that data does exist in a map form.
I would just, my curiosity is about a possible pond. And is there a spring somewhere on that property? And I'm not aware of that, and I don't,
Not that I'm aware of having
Right.
been on this property so
And
many
or is there
times.
enough water flowing through there to actually accomplish something like that, you know?
Where you get into an Army Corps permit issue to create a pond.
understood. No,
So,
I-
I'm just bringing that to the
I get
attention.
it.
But the only place in terms of the water source, you'd really need to be, the largest volume of flow comes out of this wetland,
Correct.
okay? Out of this wetland in here. So you might be able to consider something up in this area in here, possibly. Down in that area would be a little bit more of a challenge, just because of the width of the property in terms of how you'd be able to integrate and develop the stream, develop the pond within the stream network.
Thanks, Bob.
You bet.
Well, any more questions? Or answers? We take answers too. No? Okay, how about,
And before you go to public comment, unless anybody else has any comments, I just,
Yeah, I just
Okay.
thought we would talk to you and Chris about what you need to move forward.
well, part of it is, I'm gonna go through all the minutes, everybody's comment plus my notes. Again, anything you've written down as far as comments and what we've submitted, you know, you don't have to give it today. If you could give those to Laurie, that could be scanned and sent to us, including anything else that pops in your head, so that we can try and refine this a little bit more. Yeah, that would be good. Any comments on the outline format?
It seems like on the outline that 5 and 6 are the key ones.
Okay,
The rest of it is just regurgitating
a lot of
what's
information. that was in.
happened, yeah. So 5 and 6 appear to be the recommendations and the implementation strategies, I think, are the two key ones.
Yeah.
Is that further on in this thing that you have here?
There's a single page.
You know, I didn't put it onto this.
Well, maybe we could just talk about what graphics, that was one of the questions you thought.
Yeah, in terms of the graphics, you know, in terms of, well, again, the plan, Ryan, can you go back? Keep going. I put those in as, because we needed to talk about where we were in the visioning session. One more? So basically, this is one that we fine-tuned after the last meeting, which kind of defined the areas and potential use within there in terms of looking at it for long range. So yes, part of it is this adequate? And I mean, it may still need some fine tuning, but in terms of showing the parcel and the amount of land area, what type of potential uses if you went at a certain density, which is what we did in some of these, that shows what you have possible, you know, with that type of mix of lot sizes. Or just leave it as just what the lot area is for housing and not get into specifics. Because after hearing tonight, you know, this afternoon, the concern with numbers. Maria, can you go to the next one, please? Because like on this one here, when we were looking at it as a phasing, we defined a couple of areas, you know, where we looked at this area that butts up to Wallace Woods and looking at developing those like 20,000 square foot lots. And I can't read my text on here, it's just blurred, on how many units you could potentially get within that defined area. You know, then we had obviously the potential town hall location. And then we defined the acreage associated with this. And again, with the phasing plan, what we did is we started looking at if these things had to be I gotta get out of that light, if they were broken out as parcels that would be sent, thank you, Lord, that would be sent, you know, be developed by either a private developer or public-private, however the town did it, in order to fall into zoning provisions, that basically that red line constituted the entire parcel area so that you could develop your density calculations on that versus it being defined as open space, common everything, but what was open space in the overall plan that could be integrated and become part of the requirement, you know, in terms of like with Wallace Woods, you said with your open space, you could get down to 20,000 less, but the balance of the 40,000 had to be in open space as an example. So that would help to accommodate for some of that. So that's how that phasing was done. The
So
question-
maybe we could just look at map 1 versus map 2 here. And if people think that both or one should be in the plan or what?
Bob, does the second map necessitate for a density change, a zoning change as well?
It would be talking about smaller lot sizes to get that type of configuration. It basically did a range of lot sizes in order to come up with that particular
Yeah,
potential
my
density.
personal opinion is to stay away from zone changing as far as a map goes,
Yeah.
because it's misleading.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist except on that map. The fact that in order for that to happen, it's a town vote, and that doesn't mean it's gonna happen.
Right, and it was more or less the scenarios of what the potential opportunities were. Some of that will probably wind up being in an appendix, so it's data that, as you move forward, you can go back to, well, how did we come up with this, or what supported this type of thing? So, because almost all the information gets put into your plan anyways as your reference resource and appendix, so.
Right,
we
so
can
it
pull
would
that.
be sequential then. So
Yeah.
if so-and-so happened, then this density could be. If thus and thus happened, then this density could be.
Right,
And the offsets for the open spaces, did that include the CMP right-of-way? Or has that already been sourced out?
oh, you mean in that other scenario, the phasing?
Correct.
I think I left can you go to that? I can't remember. No, CMP easement was left out of that.
Okay.
Okay. So basically what it was is, there is some upland area in here
Yeah.
that would have potential, but we looked at coming along the CMP easement, that area could be defined more as open space, because it would be a challenge just to try and put something into that would fit into the fabric if you're going to do a higher density. Okay, I'll go back to the other one.
I think that's a great map. It shows you what you can do, what the possibilities are, and I think it lays it out pretty good.
Okay.
So that if it was decided that we wanted to go ahead with putting trails or something, let's say, like Rebecca was saying,
Yeah.
do something now. If we were to do that, which is not a bad idea, and open space and so forth, who would we talk to? We've identified A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and
Yeah.
who would we talk to make sure that if we put something in there, if it came down the road, whenever it was, that we needed to build something, that we're not in the way, and now something that people have come to love, now gonna be torn up.
Right.
So who do we talk to say, this makes a lot of sense to go this way, that way, or whatever way?
Well, I think that kind of goes to what I was starting to talk about earlier, is that you have, we've shown on here the developable areas that would fit, and then based on this, work on how your trails could go through. Right now, this plan identifies more wetland,
Right.
more open space than what the development plan was for the property. So you could develop how a network of trails could go in. If you wanted to carve out a piece out of E, and I'm just throwing that out there because of this area up in here, contiguous with the open space, that you could create some sort of more active area and define that, and then be able to preserve, where your future development could go.
I was just wondering who we would consult with or talk with, and
Well, we can take it right from all the
Yeah.
data that we've put together in
Yeah.
terms of
And if-
defining what's being,
yeah.
if you take that first visioning plan of how the road network could work up in there, that starts to give you a basis of how.
Somewhere in there you had a community house or a gym or a meeting house and so forth, and
That was right in here.
right in there.
I mean, you wouldn't want to put a park in a place where you might be able to have a small
Exactly.
development. I
Exactly.
wouldn't think.
No, I
think
agree.
that you'd
I
wanna
was
put it
thinking
in-
more of trails and things of that nature. And maybe if we were smart, and I know we are,
I was gonna let,
Now we're
that,
thinking.
if some of the trails, if you're talking down the road, whenever it is, years from now, when you're gonna start to put sidewalks in and stuff like that, maybe you're gonna do a dual purpose, and, some of the trails, we might wanna put them you know, biking and so forth.
Right.
Maybe they want to put some kind of a tarmac in there or just concrete. I don't know, just thinking, you know, so.
Well, what I can do is take one of the concept development scenarios, look at it, and kind of trace out where the trails would be based on the plan that has been done for the development, and then taking some of the scenarios in terms of the feedback from the visioning session where people think trails ought to be, and try and put together a real rough sketch, you know, to give you some sort of vision that, you know, we might
So
be
they
able
don't conflict with the proposed development area.
Correct.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
good.
And then again, you know, I know you say the open space is difficult to take away once you have it. You know, if it's defined in the plan, you know, until such time, to go to Rebecca's comment about making it look nicer rather than looking like a spoil site until something actually happens. You know, you revegetate it, maybe it becomes it doesn't become a real high-level soccer field, but it becomes a practice area. I don't know what the practice things are like now, but I know when I was coaching the Little League, trying to find practice fields was difficult. And I don't think there've been any more fields built since I was doing that 20 years ago.
So you would put that,
We can show how some of those areas could be utilized to just do temporary stabilization and/or just, you know, turn them into meadows. So at least it's another possible, and you could always mow trails through that.
in
you know.
unbuildable areas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Because once you put something in like that, nobody wants to get rid of it.
oh, what I'm saying is temporary type use. So if you did meadows and you brush hogged it once or twice a year, you create that path. I mean, I know there's one farm field, I can't remember where it is now, that, well, they don't do it anymore, they used to, is they actually had cut trails through the old field so people could actually walk through it. I think it was in Arundel, I can't remember. So, but anyway, so we can try and take a look at some initial
How about the
concepts.
other graphics?
Well, we already discussed that one. The other graphics I've thrown in here only for the purposes of having any discussion. So this is kind of where we were looking at, you know, from part of that visioning session. This kind of pulled out, you know, I didn't put the first concept, which was just overall development, but this one shows preserving some open space up in here. This is where the density was occurring in here. This would be attached kind of at the end as an appendix item, so that you can go back, or subsequent committees or boards or what have you, can go back, you know, when all of a sudden it's determined, oh, we really need to do some housing. What were we thinking about when we talked about that as being a development area? It shows what some of that potential is. Okay.
I think what this picks up to is those access points to
Yep.
other parcels.
Exactly.
That we probably don't want to lose.
Right, yeah. And we can put that on the previous plan in terms of the usable land area.
I just put in a plug that when you put that in the appendix, again, as we were saying, make sure it's very clearly stated that this isn't in here as part of, you know, one of the options we're all discussing, but it's already been sketched out. If 10 years from now that's of use to people, it's there. We
Which
can make it really clear so people,
You're going,
again, that
what we'll
always
do is we'll have an
frees everybody up.
appendix section, there will be the visioning session.
Right,
And the graphics, it'll be a summary in the beginning of that as to what all the documentation
right.
actually
Because
is.
we don't want to lose that, but we just don't.
Exactly.
You hear what I'm saying, yeah.
Because it basically helps to support, as you said, there's been more information gathered on this than I thought we were gonna wind up with.
Yeah, you have.
You know, and, but you don't wanna throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there may be something relevant 10 years from now from this plan that
Right.
says, oh, this is what we're potentially thinking about that could happen, so.
Bob,
Okay.
while you're sketching in trails
Yeah.
and such, could you be sure that you've sketched in for if you would, more wild areas around the vernal pools?
Oh, yeah.
And so that not only are they somewhat inaccessible, but accessible, meaning that a vernal pool in 2019, it'd be really nice if it was still there in 2029.
It doesn't show on here, but that's where the pool is right there. There's actually an old tote road that
And there's
comes
3
right
of them,
through, that cuts through and comes back up in here and goes off towards Cape Road, or Old Cape Road. So, there's a lot of this, of course, I haven't walked them in the last 5 years, but they were pretty much, you know, undisturbed, you know, or they were disturbed, but they hadn't overgrown when I first started looking at this property in 2006.
I just think there's areas that we could label as more sensitive than not.
Oh, yeah. You know, and I think some of the comments that came through some of the stakeholders is creating an environmental education program that can be coordinated in here, doing trails and, you know, informational type signs, that ultimately, those are one of the things that I think that came out of the stakeholders group. I think it was.
Yeah, and think about our trails as multiple use. You know, people like to walk, some people like to run, some people like to ski,
Yeah.
some people like to bike. There's a variety of that, and I think it's all compatible if you lay it out in a certain way.
Right. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity with what's protected as far as the environmental components of this site. Okay.
So, of the graphics, that was the original question?
Basically, the graphic, you know, really as far as the master plan, some of the other information will be in the body, will be some of the site analysis information
I'm
that
going to
was
say,
done.
the site constraints, where you get to discuss, you know, the assessment summary, pages 19 and 20.
Right.
You know, some graphics. I mean,
There will be.
It seemed to me that might have come sooner in the
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, it needs to
but
be
with-
refined more. The basic graphic is there.
Yeah.
But it shows existing conditions and context, and that's gonna be.
Yeah, and this one doesn't show too much at this scale.
Well, actually, it turned out to be the wrong map that got put in
okay.
there. I discovered that today when I was having slides put together, and I said, where'd this one come from? So, anyway, we've generated so many maps in this process that my file is about 27 different folders on my computer, never mind what I have paper documents on my desk, so. Okay,
So any other thoughts on the outline or the content or the strategies or recommendations of what you expect to see?
Well, I thought in the recommendations, we were gonna get our own, all of us get our notes together, and then
Yeah.
we're gonna have a meeting on that, correct?
yeah, if you can send me the notes so I
Right.
can compile
Yeah, right.
everything, and if it
Yeah.
means I can edit the draft
Yeah.
plans, whatever it turns out to be, that we can get back together. so.
And I think that the implementation strategies, once we synthesize that, the implementation strategies have got
Fall out of that.
weight,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So-
And also the thing with the section on the zoning, you know, in terms of just having all the discussion is really looking at that. You know, Chris pulled together, you know, the different scenarios from keeping the same zoning, go contract zoning, overlay zone,
Yep.
that type of thing that gives you the opportunities of how to potentially look at how to achieve the goals. And I think, like, you know, you're saying, Mike, is figure out what those goals are gonna be, and that's gonna somewhat direct, you know, how that section on zoning recommendations. Although they're broad enough right now, that I think any scenario you come through, they would probably provide guidance anyway, so.
Does Chris have anything to add? Do you have anything to add at all?
No, I think if there was any questions,
I was watching your hand get cramped down.
I think if there was any questions on our kind of initial approach on trying to put some kind of implementation on the zoning piece of it, I mean, we've just broke it into those three basic flavors. If there's questions on that, or if you, again, you can email questions about that. But essentially, it looks like if you do want to go down that road, it sounds like you kind of are not in a hurry to do that, and that's fine. Again, this is just really kind of giving you what you can kind of use to kind of continue the process, that's all, and show that you've kind of done your due diligence and you're kind of moving in that direction. I think we'll make it clear that it's not going to be a development plan. This is really just a plan to kind of get you moving in the right direction, that's all it is.
Thank you.
At that point, if I can find my note. What do you think about, rather than calling a master plan, you call it a land use feasibility plan? That was a quick one that came out, and then we still want to call it the village parcel, or we're going to call it Kennebunk Village tomorrow? Did I say Kennebunk?
Maybe feasibility is a word they like.
It's better than master.
Yeah, master plan's too definitive.
So if people
You
are
can think
gonna,
about that.
if people are gonna get comments back, what is a reasonable deadline that we should set for that?
Well, I know when the holiday's coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, If you get them to me on the evening of December 24th, I'll put them in my notebook. No. The sooner the better. I mean, even if they come in, piecemeal, at least I can start pulling, Chris and I can sit down and start pulling some of this stuff apart and seeing where some of the points are.
Okay.
Just gets us ahead of the curve.
So are we thinking by the end of the calendar year,
Yeah.
December
Oh, yeah,
31st?
yeah.
Would that be
Before, yeah.
reasonable? Okay. And then we will forward them all to Bob.
Yep.
And then Bob, what do you think a turnaround would be before they would see something from you?
I think, Chris, we need 2-3 weeks.
So, yeah, I think we talked about the third
Third weekend,
in January.
yeah. To have stuff back to sit down. We'd get stuff out ahead of that, but actually reconvene the third week of January, so if I can get stuff out the week. What is the third week of January? I think the 22nd was a Wednesday, Tuesday.
Would staff want to see that first, I would imagine?
Yeah.
Kind of get some feedback.
Yeah,
Maybe at the end of the month, end of January, come back
to the committee.
with a draft.
So you're thinking the last week of January,
Mhm.
How about a little bit later?
the
We
can
first
do
week
later.
of February?
Yeah.
February 4th?
You're way away.
First week of February, 4th to the 11th. I mean, not that that matters.
Sure it matters. You're important.
Well, we could meet on February 3rd before you go.
Yeah, that's all right. That's what you're gonna do to me January 9th.
So do you want to do February 4th? But I mean, we can get stuff out so that you could have it ahead of time anyway to, get
She's
more
gonna
of
be
your
gone
comments.
February 4th, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
the
I would-
information will
I would
be
need it.
to you folks early enough that if Sheila wants to have comments
yeah.
to leave, that sort of thing.
Well, how does that week work for people?
What was that week again? I've just got my
They
calendar.
were talking about the first week of February.
It's good for me.
Tuesday again.
You're out? Out.
No, I'm here.
You're here.
Yeah, I'm here. Tuesday's not as good, but I can probably make it work.
Okay, what day would work?
Monday, Wednesday,
Not-
Thursday.
Not Monday and Wednesday.
All right. Thursday?
How about
Thursday or-
Thursday?
Tuesday.
Thursday's the 6th.
Thursday, the
Monday and
6th?
Tuesday are the only days I can do that week.
That would work.
What's that
So-
date?
What-
So
what'd
how
you say?
about Monday?
Monday and Tuesday, I think.
Mondays.
You
Monday
said
doesn't work
no
for
Monday.
Jamie.
I can't do Monday.
Does Tuesday work for everyone else? Because I'll make it work.
Tuesday's great.
Oh, let's do
Tuesday's
Tuesday then.
good. Yeah.
What's the date on Tuesday?
Tuesday,
Fourth.
February 4th.
Fourth.
February 4th.
Just already have it on my schedule here.
You already have it on your schedule? How did you do that?
Psychic. Not psycho, psychic.
It's okay, the 4th.
Wow,
Okay.
that was easy. We all set?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna open up for public comments. Is there anybody that has anything that wants to bring it up? Bring anything up? You wanted to, you had your hand up an hour ago, so. Sure.
Good evening, Paul Hogan, Goose Rocks. So I assume the public could contribute comments to by sending them to, who, Lori again?
Lori can forward them to me.
Okay, so, and my other question is, I don't know if I'm the only one in town who have sent comments, but I've never, ever seen the comments up on the website. I'd be interested in what other people think, since there's been very limited opportunity for people to speak at the very end of meetings. I've never gotten an answer to any of my questions. I've sent a lot of them. I know people say I've been pestering.
Did you
but-
ask for an answer, or?
Yeah. And, so, one of them, and I think it was pointed out by Mike tonight on the housing data, I think part of the problem is there were, the data is as good as it is, and I understand the consultant's challenge. But when you use Portland's income as the income in the area, the metro area, and when you use the housing prices in the area, and that they've been second home prices for many, many people. Werner knows, like of the new construction in this town, what's balance between second homes and year-round people. So I think because we did not analyze what the demand is for, market rate, year-round housing, we don't know that. Because the prices in town have been based upon people from away buying houses and leaving them empty most of the year. I think what I've heard often is there's a lot of community support for building a resilient community, and that means houses that aren't empty for 10 months a year, 9 months a year. I had asked in one of the emails whether there is a way to ensure that, do we have a legal opinion to say the housing is going to, there's a way to restrict by covenants or whatever to people who would live in those houses versus people from away. I think, whether development happened on this site or another site, if it was year-round housing, there would be a lot of support in the town for that. I think there'd be far less support, particularly if it's subsidized by the taxpayers, for a lot of housing on that site for people from away. I think I heard people say that tonight, and I'm happy that that seemed to reflect that. But I think the data was flawed, which led to those high numbers in the demand that scared everybody in the report. I think one tie-in with the comprehensive plan that I read was the overlay zone, which is very interesting. It suggested you could have an overlay zone on the adjacent properties, and perhaps you'd have a similar village-type development there. And when I read that, it occurred to me we could do that through the comprehensive plan on, let's say, the properties along School Street or on the other side, big spaces. We could do an overlay zone that would incent the owners of those properties to develop them not in 3-acre zones, but in a village-type property. And it could be done without spending a lot of taxpayer money.
You're saying on the abutting parcels?
Yeah, I'm talking about the McCabe property,
Yeah.
which was
The
suggested.
large
The large adjacent areas, so you'd have contiguous kinds of, so whether we did it on this site or we did it on the surrounding sites, we could perhaps accomplish the same goal by getting a developer interested in affordable housing, because he can build more on the site if we stray away from such large properties, 3-acre zoning, acre-and-a-half zoning, whatever. I know the village is much smaller square footage, but the other areas are larger zoning. And that's certainly been an affordable, and I think it's a question for the comp plan. The zoning that we've had in town has led to the unaffordability problem in part because, 3 acres costs a lot of money. People can't build on a 1-acre lot on Beechwood or someplace.
Well, especially if there's public water and sewer.
Absolutely.
Most communities have a higher density if you have public water and sewer, and Kennebunkport does not recognize that at all.
Right. Yeah, I agree. On the maps, I got very confused between the two that were next to each other, the phase 1 and the general one, because you changed all the numbering and lettering system. So you tried to look at one and then look at the other, and you went from A's and B's to 1s and 2s. And I just found them very, very confusing. If there was consistency between them, I thought they would be helpful.
Can you
But-
bring those back up again?
Yeah, I can't read it from here, but when I tried to,
This one says, that one's clearly marked.
Done. On this one, basically it was the one you've seen before. We just kind of refined it to make it read a little clearer. So it has the areas, defined, the developable portion, pods, if you will, and then what the acreage was. The other one I put into the plan, again, to have further discussion with the committee, that was based on one generated plan that we talked about as potential phasing. So it was more or less, and we pretty much decided that graphic goes probably in the appendix, not part of the actual report. But it was for our point of discussion to get some sort of more direction of which way this plan is going to fall through. So I know what the confusion was in terms of it not being lettered A and B.
But I think his point is that in terms of graphics in a plan, if people know that this map looks different than this map, but this is the area I'm looking at in both, I mean, is that what you're saying? That there's some recognition and fluidity so that
Yeah.
people can understand the areas?
Right.
And maybe the differences between the maps, but I'm still looking at Area C.
Sure. No, we can do that. We did not edit the other plan, the phase plan. We
Yeah,
just left
yeah.
it as had been for discussion only, so. But if that stays in, we can obviously take and identify those areas easy enough. Okay.
And my last comment would be, you could just call it a report, as opposed to a master plan. Master plan implies a consensus of a particular direction and set of configurations and, something the community would go towards. What I'm hearing from tonight is, we have a report of a bunch of options, and maybe you're not making a recommendation that we go to a developer and talk about developing B next year. So, it sounds like you're generating a report about all that you found out, which was a lot. Thank you.
Any more comments from the public? Any more questions?
I'm Alan Lamb. I just wanted a clarification. It's sort of related to the issue he was raising, but it has to do with the market study that was done. And what I heard in that market study, and I've heard the words tonight, demand and need for affordable housing, but what I specifically heard was while there's a demand, there's not a need for affordable housing in this area. So have we gone back? In fact, one of the committee members during that meeting used the word need, and he corrected him. He says there's not a need. He says there's a demand. If you go back to the minutes,
I don't remember.
that's what was said.
Which meeting?
The one where he gave the housing report. And then I asked the question, because of that, I said, well, or how much housing is available? Is there adequate housing? He says there's more than adequate housing available.
He was talking about the area, the wells, Kennebunkport.
The HSA.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see what you're saying now, okay.
So if we do something with affordable housing, it's not because we need it, it's because we want to do it. I just wanted to clarify that.
I think it's both.
Is there anybody else?
Good point, though.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Wayne Burbank, Goose Rocks. I really do think from, all of the businesses that I've talked to, and we're in a tourist area, that where do people live that make a minimum wage or, lower wage? They've got to go out of the area. They go to Sanford, they go to wherever they go, I don't know. But, so my way of thinking, we do need affordable housing so people don't have to travel so far. But, a lot of the people that I've talked to, myself included, thinks that the town should have bought it when it was $2.5 million. And I guess you will agree with that, you people, not 10 million. And I don't like you saying 10 million because it's 14 million with the interest on the bonds. So, if the town needs infrastructure, town hall, fire station, event building, some sort of a thing like a Waterhouse Center, we don't need, well, step back a little bit here. This map here, both of the A's are a total of 2.75 acres, the two A's together, right?
Yes.
So I know there's a way that you can move wetlands. They've done it, we talked about this before. It might take an act of God, but hey, we got time.
I think it's an act of Congress, but anyway.
Sanford moved a lot of them, the Turnpike Authority, I can show you two places they moved considerable wetlands and beaver ponds and all kinds of stuff. So I'm wondering about the piece of, the green area between the two A's there.
Right.
Wouldn't it make more sense if we could take that out and put it somewhere else and have a larger?
That's the stream corridor that goes in and underneath North Street. It takes it out to the Kennebunk River.
Okay, so there's no areas that could be mitigated and moved to other areas that would make a.
Not for
bigger
that one.
footprint.
That's the outlet for the,
Yeah. How about D and B and D? No?
To create wetland up in that area?
I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
you know, you're saying here, B, for instance, is 2.67 acres, and D is 2.24 acres. Is there not a way that we can get a larger footprint to, I mean, you're only gonna get, what, 5 homes in there? Those are, mixed housing and, higher-end houses. You're not gonna put a higher-end house on a 10,000 square foot lot, are you?
Not in that area that we were looking at the smaller, 5 to 10,000 square foot. That was some of the initial evaluation of potential use for
So I
those
wonder
areas.
how big a lot you're gonna have. You're only gonna get a few houses in there.
There's sporadic location of the housing through. Basically, what the committee was looking at is something similar to the density that the land could carry based on the current zoning in terms of numbers, but it would still require a change in zoning to reduce lot size to be able to achieve that. So it was like, I think 120 is what the net density for the parcel is now under current zoning provisions.
Is there somebody that's gonna talk to developers to see if there's any developers that are interested in any of this? Did I hear that tonight, or is that just a question? I mean, I was told by somebody back along that when that land, I think it was 2008, was gonna go to foreclosure, the town authorized 5 million to buy it. And there were at least 2 developers in the area that have developed nice complexes that looked at it then, and they wouldn't even be interested at 5 million to develop it. So I don't know, you know, hopefully the town can get somebody to be a developer, but I don't know. It's, be interesting to see, but, and one other comment, I don't think the land was ever appraised before it was bought, was it?
I can't answer that one. Oh, you mean for the town?
Yeah,
I don't know.
you know,
The town talked to several consultants, but we didn't get a formal appraisal, no.
see, I mean, I was in real estate for a while, and I mean, if you're gonna buy a house, you get a home inspection. Otherwise, you're crazy. And if
You
you're
know,
gonna
we
buy
really, we really ought to get past this now. We've paid $10 million for it. It isn't-
14, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
14.
right, 14, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
But we need to get past it. It's done. And we're trying to solve now the issue with it. And we're trying to be very, very constructive. And I don't know that your comment regarding us being stupid is.
I'm not saying
You just
that.
said that. You're stupid to buy the real
Well, you
estate.
didn't buy it.
Well, I know, I did.
Yeah, he did.
I did.
We all did.
I did. I paid taxes here.
Well, I pay taxes too, but
No,
if
you
I'd have
bought it
known they were
too.
gonna- if I'd have known they were gonna vote on this thing, I certainly would not have voted on it to
Well,
buy it. And I
all
think-
I'm saying is, it's done. Let's proceed
it's a done
and
deal.
and be
I mean-
progressive about it. It's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any more public comments?
I have one more. Hi, Judy Phillips. I have to say, I'm really pleased to see that we're not rushing towards things, that it seems like everybody's taking a breather and trying to slow this train down a little bit. One of the things that I think is a great idea, if we can put in, kind of clean it up a little bit with meadowland, just moving the fertile earth back into some places and plant, even if it's just wildflower seeds, whatever it is, and walking trails. My question to that is, if you're going to put those sorts of things, or maybe put some sort of a general use recreational thing up in that vernal pool area and beyond, aren't we going to need the road to get through there? And was the road going through there something that we're going to try and off-put to the developers, that we're going to take the sections? So I guess my question is, would we need to put the road through to have access to these walking trails and things that the community would now want to use?
You could create parking areas at either end so that people can walk in, or the road can be regraded in such a fashion that it becomes a gravel road and not a through road, but just basically gated off, and so the emergency vehicles had to get through. They would have like a crash gate or a control, but the public would have accessibility on either end, small parking areas, or you could just walk in, depending on how close you are to it. Those are possibilities.
David Clark, Wallace Woods. I just want to thank everyone here. The quality of the debate has been good. I think the thoughtfulness that's come out from all of the comments that come back has been really useful. I'd endorse what Rebecca said about, let's try and do something short-term to make it a welcoming area and get rid of the chain, and use some of the raw materials. And, again, support what Judy said in terms of this thoughtfulness, taking our foot off the gas just a little bit to think through will pay dividends in the future. But thanks for the quality of the discussion.
I'm Harrison Small. I have read lately there since the last meeting that back in 2014, the town bought a piece of land, 8 acres, a little bit more, on School Street. The purpose being for a new town hall and affordable housing. Would it be possible to keep on with that idea and put the town hall down there on School Street and keep it out of this area here and save that space and parking spaces for low-income housing? And I'm talking for maybe the young couple just getting out of college. They got between them maybe $200,000 worth of school debt, but they would still like to live here. So if we could get some low-income housing, I'm saying little small houses that look nice, not trashy, that maybe they could get for $75,000 to $100,000 on a small piece of land. I know it's going to have zoning changes to do it, but at least it would be getting some young people into the town, and that is what we need, is young people coming in for houses and housing that they can afford. Maybe somewhere on there we could put in some apartments, maybe like townhouses, and have a few of those that working through Vesta or somebody else to keep them rented all the time too, but keep the rents down that these people can afford to do it. Because if they come in here, they're not going to be, some would be able to work in town. Others might want to live here but still commute back and forth to Portland or down towards Kittery or somewhere. But if they can live here cheaper than anywhere else around, it gives us a lot of younger people in town, which is what we need. As it's been brought up before, fire department is hurting for young people. A lot of the people that are in the fire department are getting up where they're not going to want to go out at 2 o'clock on a 10 degrees below zero night and they drag a fire hose up an icy ladder. We got to get some younger people in here, and the only way to do it is to keep housing down below $100,000.
Thanks, Harrison. Is there anybody else that would like to make a comment? No?
So, I mean,
Do
I
you
would
have
just,
something to say? Yes.
so, I mean, the comments we've received from the public, I have forwarded to the consultants and the committee. And I just am looking to see if the committee is looking for me to do something different with those comments, or what you may want to do. I mean, one of the questions that, Paul did ask about the covenants and whether that was a mechanic that could actually work. I mean, one of the things we've heard is people say, we'd like this to be for year-round people, and I think part of that question is legal and part of it is about market. So it does restrict your land. I think the town, as the owner, could put covenants on the land. But if there are any questions like that you want me to follow up with outside of the consultants, or do anything with any of the comments we've received, or besides forward them to you, or anything? That's just my mechanical questions.
Lori, have any of those same questions already been answered in the Heritage Trust?
Not not on like putting I mean, they would be putting covenants on land so that the houses, but they're gonna maintain the land and lease it. This would be, I think, a little different in that if the town was to sell some land in the future, but want to maintain a covenant on all of that land, I think it's a little different.
So and I, sorry for my ignorance, but is there a link to everything that the Heritage Trust has done that the public can see exactly what the verbiage is?
They're finalizing the lease and covenants now with an attorney. So I think within the next, couple of months, that they'll have those on their website. But certainly I have access to them. And I have seen some drafts, but again, because this would be a covenant that we put on, I think of it kind of like a view easement. Sometimes, a trust or someone will purchase a view easement to protect you from building in a certain area, or, it would be a restriction on the land that would still allow you to develop the land, but it would be a restriction. And so then the question is, what are the mechanics of that legally? Would that work? And then, of course, what impact would that have on the market? I think because the town is also the owner of it, to put a restriction on that may take a town meeting vote. So there's another mechanic, I guess. And my question is that something you want me to follow up with as part of the plan, or no at this point?
I think we need to do it at some point, but I think that now, where we're not, we're in a very preliminary, until we decide whether or not there's
Okay.
gonna be, I'd wait.
I just didn't want you to be waiting for something I wasn't working on.
You had a comment? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just think, and maybe this exists on the website, I have not been on it in a while, because, but to the gentleman's point about questions that are being, that you're trying to field, and I imagine it's probably difficult to respond to everything, is there sort of an FAQ document that exists, or that maybe could exist? Because I feel like we hear a lot of the same questions over and over again, and maybe if we posted some tentative responses to that, we could be honoring the public's request for information, and also sort of fielding some of those questions for the town so that the answers are readily available.
I wouldn't say we have an FAQ document, but I guess I'd be curious from the committee if you guys could forward me what you think those FAQ questions should be. I'd be happy to work with Werner at drafting and the consultants some responses to them.
Yeah, I think, I just to second that, I think that's a great idea, because we do hear the same concerns, and not everybody comes to every meeting, understandably, or is following the
Yep.
website, but there are so many things that I think we, like, I like to think we have consensus that we are not, no one is considering putting summer homes on this property. I think we can settle that, that's been said over and over, and yet it's still a concern for folks, and so it just needs to be stated. The intent would be this is for residents, all those kind of things, but I think just getting some of that out there. And it may not even be houses, but, again, because we're sort of at a point today where we're stepping back, but there's some understoods, I think, that have come about this whole process.
Sure,
that-
so if you guys send me what those are,
Great.
then I'm happy to
We'll
draft
put them
something
in with
for
all
you.
the other stuff we send you, yeah.
Sure.
Great. Not
What are you
all
gonna
the
do
Maybe
over
a different
Christmas?
subject line, so I can sort them.
Anything else? No? Any more questions or comments from the board, committee? No?
Motion to adjourn?
I have a first, a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you. It's a very good meeting.
Okay.